各位贵宾朋友，大家晚安。TIDC 花莲论坛国际大师与你谈梦想，第一场论坛正式开始。首先为大家介绍本次的论坛主持人，实验设计合伙建筑师陈燕玲，欢迎。
各位贵宾，大家晚安，我是今天的主持人陈燕玲。我看今天实在是太多贵宾 ，Bjarke 的号召力非常大。那我们在这边非常感谢邱董事长，然后还有我们的贵宾丹麦代表处的倪处长，然后来参与我们今天的花莲论坛 TIDC 的论坛。那在开始的这一段，我们首先邀请到这个第一场是我们的 Bjarke Ingels， 他是 TIME 时代周刊2016的100大影响人物。今天为我们要带来一个所谓的永续享乐主义的演讲。那在这个整个论坛开始之前呢，我们邀请我们的台开集团大家长邱董事长来为我们讲一句话。
谢谢哈，首先要谢谢今天的主讲人Bjarke，他现在其实是一个非常非常忙到处飞来飞去。那么他今天早上刚到台湾，明天清晨要离开台湾，能够拨一天来跟我们所有人分享。那么我记得我们在2013年12月的时候，他是第一次在这里演讲。那么我们一起合作大概是2009年，那么也就是说，在这么多年里面呢，我们也很高兴看到他这个我们一起的想法，我们看到他的梦想，我们的梦想，那他的梦想在全世界一个一个地方在实现，我们也希望我们跟他一起的做的梦想呢，可以在台湾实现。台湾必须要考虑到的就是我们怎么样国际化，我们怎么样跟国际连接，我们不连接也不行。包括这永续主义来看，我们的地球的永续是所有人的责任。我们不连接，我们不连接这个观念，我们不能够接受这样的做法，或者我们就将会失去这个世界的一部分，一份子。那么就是永续。我们也知道，我们每一个人，我们的平均年龄也多了10岁，那么我们的永续健康也变成是一个非常重要。而享乐主义呢，是人类一直的梦想。那我们如何能够永续，是可能我们更大的梦想。今天我们很感谢这么多老朋友，这么多过去的现在的能够推动台湾走向世界的重要的人都来参加，这是我们很大的荣幸。我代表我们公司跟所有这次主办的人员跟促成这次的人，感谢各位。今天也希望我们在第一场还有第二场接下来的地方呢，有更多的引起大家更重视的，我们更应该正向的看我们的未来。那么也是我们更应该大胆说，我们要享乐，我们不要悲痛，我们不要这个消极，我们要更积极的，能够让我们能够永续享乐。谢谢各位今天的光临，那么也希望大家也感谢今天的大家拨空来听这个。我们今天呢，同时也在我们的网站跟我们的在 Facebook 里面都有同时直播，也梦会是我们公司希望我们有好的知识，我们有好的东西，与更多的人分享，这也是我们今天办这个的主要 目的。谢谢各位今天的光临，希望大家能够很高兴的来听这一场，也听完以后也觉得说值得再来。谢谢各位。
Okay, so before we welcome Bjarke Ingels, I'm going to briefly give an introduction of Bjarke Ingels, just in case you guys are here only because you saw the fantastic picture of Bjarke on your roman. So I'm just kidding. So 我想大家对Bjarke 一定不陌生，他在我们的当代建筑中扮演的角色，就像我刚刚说的，它其实并不是只有在建筑相关的媒体被报道，它在各式各样，就是不止于建筑相关的媒体都被报道。为什么呢？因为它在当代建筑里面扮演着一个非常象征性的角色。它透过它的不管是我这边有一本，它最近的出版品叫做《Hard to Code》，然后它还有一个稍早前还有一个就是 Yes It's More。其实他讲了非常多的对于建筑的诠释，包括他质疑当代现代主义里面的方盒子，或者是他对于永续，对于建筑师在目前现今的社会里面扮演的角色，都有非常不一样的诠释。那所以我们希望可以透过今天他这个永续享乐主义 Hedonistic Sustainability 可以给我们更多的 insight 关于它的建筑。So let's welcome Bjarke Ingels.
Thank you. I would like to, it's very nice to be here in Taipei, where I've been coming since I got to know the chairman, I think in 2008. So it's been a long friendship and collaboration. I would like to talk a little bit about the way we work and what are the ideas that fuel our designs, and essentially what are the values we try to manifest in our built environment. So first a little bit about our company. We're based in New York and Copenhagen. I have very committed colleagues. Passion is really what fuels the effort. And our office space, since as architects what we work with is to create the space and to create the framework for the way we want to live and work. Our office space is located inside a former Carlsberg factory, the Danish beer company. They used to make the least interesting part of the beer, the bottle cap, in this space. But it's amazing as a space for a workplace, and it shares a lot of attributes with the kind of workspace that people are looking for these days, that former industrial spaces, because of the ceiling heights, the big open spaces, the large spans, you have a lot of freedom and flexibility. And I'm going to return to this idea of how spaces for infrastructure or industry can actually be used for other things. But we've been thinking a lot about workspace because we've been working with Google to imagine their future workspace in California. And Google, of course, is already famous for their workspace, the colorful, playful, active, and sort of healthy environments with the famous snack kitchens. But they've also somehow become the standard for Silicon Valley. And as Google has developed from a startup company 25 years ago to a global behemoth with more than 30,000 people, and as Google has started venturing into not just the internet, but hardware with a laptop, the Pixel series, driverless cars, and more sort of wild projects like Loon, providing internet to the world via balloons, hosting, server farming, and of course registering all of planet Earth with their camera cars. It seems like an interesting time for Google to start thinking about cities and buildings. And if you look at, this is downtown Mountain View in Silicon Valley. This is the Google campus. So you can say that Google is almost the same size as the main urban space of the city they're in. And this is actually true for all of Silicon Valley, that for each town there is an equivalent tech campus. So they can't just be thinking about themselves. They have to become an urban neighborhood. So together with Larry Page, we developed this idea of trying to turn all the parking of Silicon Valley into park, to create a dome that sort of gently covers an interior space, and then to have this human scale work environment with the freedom and flexibility of being under one unifying roof. We're starting construction. We started construction of the two first parts of this project. We imagine these sort of large, gentle spans. And inside, we basically looked at the way that Google is organized as a company. So Google is organized around these studios of 4 people. The studios bundle up into teams of up to 25 people. The teams constitute neighborhoods of up to 150 people, neighborhoods into communities of up to 450 people. So finally, we are sort of imagining that the first building is going to be the home for 3,000 people. So rather than having all of the support functions cluttering up this floor plan, we're sweeping all of the support, the snack kitchens, the server rooms, the meeting rooms underneath. So we create a continuous landscape of interconnected platforms. Each platform is the size of a community, 150 people, and they're interconnected so you can get from any workstation to the other in one continuous movement. Then you have a series of courtyards that give access to all of the amenities, the meeting rooms, the laboratories. This entire landscape is covered by a single membrane. It has photovoltaics that harvests all of the sunlight. And then you have basically daylight seeping in the gaps between the openings. So basically, as an idea, we imagine all of the landscape continues inside in the courtyards. Then we have all of the active social spaces in what we call the Medina, which is the lower level. Above, what we've sort of nicknamed Burning Man is this idea of a sort of wide open space with the potential for infinite diversity, and at the top, the clouds. Perhaps you could reduce the contrast or the brightness a little bit on the projector, because it's burning out a little bit, if someone received that message. And the basic idea is where a typical tech campus has maybe a spectacular lobby, but the workspace is generic. Here, the cathedral is actually where people spend 90% of their time. Rather than having, good daylight by the window and then it gets increasingly bad, we have the perfect amount of daylight for every single workstation. And rather than sort of mixing social activities and focused work, we're concentrating all of the social spaces on the lower levels and all of the assembly spaces and meeting rooms, and then you have more quiet focus above. So this is what it's going to look like in the future. You can see the entire material of this tensile roof is photovoltaics, and the gaps are just proportioned enough to bring the perfect amount of daylight in. It's going to be open to the public, so if you visit Silicon Valley, you can actually move into the main space and walk along this this green street where you actually have a series of cafes that open to the public. You can look into the courtyards, but only the Googlers can enter the courtyards. The courtyards are almost like squares in a city, so they become like space-defining elements with different kinds of landscaping and identity. And then from here you can ascend into this vast, almost like a hangar of collaboration, again with abundance of daylight, views out. And essentially, since it's a series of connecting platforms, you still have the small scale of the individual entity. And the idea is that each team can decide which kinds of furniture, which kinds of space dividers would they want. So you end up having this sort of collage expressing the character of the different teams. So back to work and back to what are the ideas that shape our thinking and our designs. The way we try to think about the city is to think of our cities and buildings as man-made ecosystems. So rather than a city, thinking about it as a city of facades or sculptural objects, we think about these like three-dimensional ecosystems where we channel not only the flow of people, but also the flow of resources through our urban environment. And one of the things we've been sort of developing over the last 15 years is this idea that sustainability is often associated with some kind of moral imperative that you have to be sustainable because you have to be thinking about the future and the planet. But often it comes in the form of a compromise, almost like the idea of taking cold showers in the morning because it's too expensive or it's bad for the environment if you shower warm too long. But we thought, what if we look at sustainability as a design problem? What if sustainable cities and buildings are actually more enjoyable than the non-sustainable ones? And we call this idea hedonistic sustainability, trying to focus on how we can actually design our cities and our buildings so they increase our enjoyment. And the first time we thought about this was when we designed the Danish pavilion for the Shanghai World Expo that was focusing on sustainable cities. And we designed the pavilion like a streetscape of Denmark, complete with some of the elements that make Danish cities not only more sustainable, but also more enjoyable. For instance, in Denmark for the last 20 years, we've had city bikes. Almost 50% of the Danes or the Copenhageners commute by bicycle. So we created a pavilion where you could experience the thrill of biking through your city instead of being stuck in a traffic jam or looking endlessly for a parking spot. You could also bicycle through the exhibition itself, making it the perfect museum for impatient people, because you could actually do the whole thing in 5 minutes without missing a single exhibit. Also at the heart of the pavilion, we recreated the Copenhagen harbor bath. In Copenhagen, this is our first project we did 16 years ago, but it's basically because in Copenhagen, the port in downtown Copenhagen has become so clean that you can swim in it. So you don't have to sit in a car for hours to get to the beach. You can literally jump in the port in the middle of the city. So a sustainable city and a clean harbor is not only good for the fish, it's also amazing for the citizens of the city. So we recreated a small sample of how clean the Danish harbor water is, if not how cold. And then finally we thought, like, how are we gonna get the Chinese to come and visit this pavilion? And we tried to look for common denominators between Denmark and China. and we found that in the Chinese public school curriculum, they have 3 fairy tales by Hans Christian Andersen, one of them being the story of the Little Mermaid, the national symbol of Denmark. So all 1.3 billion Chinese have actually grown up with the story of the mermaid. So we thought, why don't we bring the mermaid to China? We actually had to go and like the Danish Nationalist Party, they tried to pass a law specifically against moving the mermaid. So I had to go to Parliament and argue her case, and as you can see, we got her. Then we had to get her through Chinese customs, and finally into the pavilion. In her absence, we thought, you know, a lot of tourists, they're gonna go in vain, and the mermaid is gone. So we invited the Chinese artist Ai Weiwei to come and create an art installation as a cultural exchange. And what he did is he installed a surveillance camera in the pavilion, the same surveillance camera that the Chinese state had installed in front of his studio. But this one was transmitting a live image to a gigantic flat screen he mounted in the water where the mermaid normally sits. So the tourists that went in vain could see that she was fine. She was just on the other side of Earth. But also it became like a loophole in the Great Firewall of China. For 6 months, it was probably the only uncensored live TV feed from China to the rest of the world. But essentially, this was like our first time grappling with the idea of hedonistic sustainability. Also, like the way that we try to work is that we try to be as direct about what are the values or what are the criteria that shape our thinking, and what is the knowledge that we acquire to inform our design decisions. So you can say in the beginning of each project, we try to look at what are the key criteria in this particular case. What is the biggest problem we have to solve, or what is the greatest potential that we can unleash? And then we use that information to make well-informed design decisions. And this can be a lot of different things, and I'll just show you some examples. You can almost say that it's trying to identify what are the practicalities surrounding this project and try to find ways of resolving these practicalities as poetically as possible. One example is that we did a sports hall at my old high school in Copenhagen. And we could basically place the sports hall either on the football field, but it's the most favorite sport in Denmark, so that would be like a political suicide. Or we could place it in the courtyard, but the courtyard is the main social space for the kids. So we didn't want to fill it up, so we proposed to bury it. But digging, especially if you dig deep, can become quite expensive. So we wanted to minimize the excavation. The rules, it's going to be a handball hall. The rules of handball, they dictate that you need 4.5 meters clear on the perimeter, and you need 7.5 meters in the middle. So, and actually we got the commission from my old math teacher from high school, and as a sort of homage to her, we designed the roof of the sports hall based on the mathematical formula for ballistic arc. So basically, if you stand at the end of the field and you throw to 7.5 meters, this is the space you need. So basically, when you look at this sort of graceful glue lamb curvature, it's actually not designed by us, but it's designed by the mathematics of throwing a handball. And of course, as a result, in the courtyard, it becomes this gentle hill. You have perimeter skylights that wash the space below in light. And we were afraid that we were going to fill up the courtyard. But as actually the dean of the high school and the janitor believes that they can prove that we have tripled the use of the courtyard, because after they opened the sports hall, they've had to put up 3 times as many waste bins, because the kids, they spend much more time in the courtyard now, and they also waste a lot more. But essentially you can say like this like poetical little hill is actually an imprint of the activities of throwing handballs in the sports hall below. So that's one example. A completely different example is that this is a picture of 2 of our clients in Copenhagen, probably the cutest clients we're ever going to get, perhaps even cuter than Chairman Chu. But the interesting thing, it's the 2 great white pandas that Denmark has received or is receiving from the Chinese state. And one of the things we of course, when we started the project, we started educating ourselves in pandas, and we met with all of the caretakers from the zoo that know about pandas. And one thing that we didn't know is that pandas are very solitary. You can't put, we're getting a male and a female. You can't put 2 pandas in the same enclosure. They're going to be miserable and they're going to get into a fight. A little bit like people. So if you separate them, everything is good. So we came up with this idea of creating an enclosure that creates a whole out of a male and a female habitat. So obviously the sort of whole notion of the symbol of yin-yang became incredibly relevant. The habitat is accessible from all sides. We're gently lifting up in the ground to create a shelter and a cave for the male and the female, where they can be without seeing each other. The visitors can access them 360 degrees. So here you see it's going to be sort of the centerpiece of the zoo. The landscaping, that's sort of where the densification of the bamboo creates a visual separation. And basically sort of you can move along the perimeter, or you can actually descend and look into the stables from underneath. So we've tried to sort of eliminate any kind of classic evidence of fencing by integrating it into the bamboo. You have the sort of the sheltered area. It turns out that the climate where the pandas come from is exactly the same climate as the Danish climate. So they can actually live without any sort of full enclosure. They just need a little bit of shelter. From the restaurant, you can look into the panda habitat. We're keeping the materials dark inside the restaurant so that you don't see your own reflection, but you actually look straight into the habitat. Also, we've lowered the floor of the restaurant so you look at the panda in eye height. So essentially the whole sort of design has been shaped by this sort of the challenge of trying to create a holistic habitat, but with a clear separation for him and her. So once we've identified what a project is all about, we haven't automatically found out what it's going to look like. We just know what are the most important things we need to deal with. So once we formulated the question, we now have to start looking for an answer. And that involves a lot of trial, a lot of testing. I'll give you an example. For a museum we are building in Switzerland, in this beautiful valley. It's Vallée du Choux, outside Geneva. It's the cradle of Swiss watchmaking. A beautiful valley covered in snow half of the year. And this is where Audemars Piguet started their factory of watches 150 years ago. in this workshop. This is their historical building. This is their current headquarters. And our first thinking was to try to integrate the museum as an infill between the two old buildings. We thought that could be the most discreet, but the more we looked at it, the more it felt like an annoying newcomer butting in between two old friends. So we thought maybe we should stay low, be part of the landscape instead. There was a brief of different galleries, so we thought, what if we make a village of interconnected galleries? Maybe it could be like a loop, like a journey where you end up visiting the workshop. We tried different ways of achieving this with like changing success. Then we thought maybe we should really be part of the landscape in some form. We are in Switzerland, obviously. So then basically each step creates some new information, starts some new questions, and gradually the process matures. But basically what we did, we took the museum program of galleries with the biggest gallery in the middle, organized it as a chronological journey, coiled it up like a double spiral so it can fit on the site. We have the biggest gallery in the middle, and you end up visiting the workshop. The roof slopes along with the site, so we end up creating these openings where you can capture views of the valley and get daylight into the deep floor plates. As you move through the exhibition, sometimes you have sort of well-defined exhibition spaces. Sometimes you can look over the shoulder of a master watch builder, watch him repair an ancient timepiece. And if you notice one thing, there are absolutely no columns in the museum, and that's because like I'm just gonna borrow a prop here. Can I take this? I'll give it back. Thanks. Glass is actually stronger than steel when it comes to compression, but it's very bad at tension. 1 second. We're gonna make a little demonstration here. When there's an earthquake, it buckles and breaks. But because the building is circular, the facade is circular, the arc of the circle actually gives rigidity to the glass. So even when there's a seismic event, it won't buckle and it won't break. So we can actually carry the entire roof on the glass itself. You can say it's almost like in watchmaking, some of the disciplines about miniaturization, where you try to make the elements as small as possible to reduce the size of the watch, or skeletonization, where you eliminate material to make it as light and transparent as possible. And in this case, you can say, like, in many ways, watchmaking is about getting the maximum amount of impact with the minimum amount of material. And having no evidence of columns, you can say, is very much part of this, this spirit. And then finally, at the end, you visit the workshop in the old building. So when you present the idea like this, it feels almost inevitable that, of course, a museum of watchmaking is going to look like this. But you're just forgetting that we had to kiss like 50 frogs before we actually found the right idea. It's currently under construction. These are some of the first tests of actually carrying the roof with glass. Actually, once we had won the competition for the museum, Audemars Piguet asked us to design a hotel for them. The valley is actually part of one of the longest cross-country ski routes in Switzerland. So we sort of looked at this idea of organizing the hotel as an extension of the ski slope, so that all of the social programs actually open up to the slope. So here you have the museum, here you have the the hotel. So basically, as you ski through the valley, you can actually ski in and ski out directly from the hotel. Of course, like the spa opens up to the terraces, and you know, from after skiing, you can sort of finish your glühwein, and then you can ski home to where you came from. Or every room has direct access to the slopes. So essentially, this idea that, you know, each project carries within it a unique set of criteria that allows for very different architectures, and even for the same client in the same valley, because the programs are different, the designs end up looking radically different. So one thing we've been looking at in this sort of notion of sustainability, and a form of sustainability that can actually increase the quality of life, is how do buildings respond to their local environment and to their local climate? And one man we've been very inspired by is this guy, Bernard Rudowski. He is the author of the book and the exhibition Architecture Without Architects, an introduction to non-pedigreed architecture. And basically, he did this exhibition back in the 60s at MoMA, and what he discovered was that with the international style of modernism, buildings had started looking the same everywhere. This is the Lever House in New York. This is the Hotel Royal in Copenhagen. Two radically different cities, almost identical buildings. And that's because with the international style of modernism came also contemporary or modern building services. You had this like whole new technology that actually created a lot of freedoms and actually took over some of the functions that the design of the building used to take. So you know, suddenly you had air conditioning, so and central heating. So the thickness of the walls, the insulation of the walls became indifferent. You had mechanical ventilation, so you didn't have to open the windows and you didn't have to be close to the windows. You could have much deeper floor plans. And you had electric lights, so you didn't have to be close to the window. You could sit very far from the window and still see. So in the end, the architecture was reduced to a boring box that was tube fed with a basement full of machinery that of course also spent a lot of energy. And the result was that buildings started looking the same everywhere. He was fascinated by what he called vernacular architecture, looking back at how people over centuries and millennia had found ways of using the locally available materials to respond to the local climate in a way that not only optimized living conditions in a non-mechanical way, but also looked incredibly exciting and beautiful. So for instance, like the white villages of Greece with the flat roofs, where you can ascend in the evening and enjoy the cold breeze. Of course, like the igloo, the spherical form combines a maximum contained volume with a minimum exterior, and the air trapped in the snow actually functions as insulation. Or like in China, in these windswept steps, they had developed this sort of series of sunken courtyards that were protected from the environment and actually created these peaceful spaces right below the wind above. So what we are interested in is in not going back and living like we did 500 years ago. We call it vernacular 2.0. Ideas where you can use contemporary technology to calculate and simulate and model the environmental performance of a design. You can sort of calculate what is the thermal exposure of a building geometry, what is the airflow through the structure itself. So you can say, instead of architecture without architects, we are suggesting we could create engineering without engines. So basically engineer the buildings so well that they don't rely on engines or machinery to compensate and make them inhabitable. And sort of, you can say, if this is the global map that we are used to looking at, a map that is characterized by nation states and countries, this is maybe a map that is more relevant when it comes to climate, because it shows that you have different climate zones where, of course, the challenges with the climate are going to be similar, but you also have similar climates on very distinct parts of the planet where some of the ideas that have been developed here could actually also be useful here and vice versa. One of the first tests of this idea of engineering without engines, we did it for a competition for the headquarters of the main energy company in Shenzhen. And Shenzhen is probably one of the most industrious regions in the world. And it's also a humid subtropical climate. So when you are building a 100,000 square meter office building, you want to try to minimize thermal exposure and glare while maximizing views and daylight. So basically we designed the facade like this sort of a pleated dress that blocks the direct sunlight but opens up for the views. So when you look to the south, you see a facade of bamboo veneer. But when you look towards the north, it's an all-glass building. Within this logic of almost like an Issey Miyake kind of skin, we can create openings, stacks of meeting rooms, sort of generous and inviting entrances. But basically this idea, without any active technology, purely because of the geometry of the facade, we can reduce the power consumption with 30%. We developed the idea together with Arab engineering. Of course, it also has an impact on the architecture of the building, so it creates these sort of elegant ways of like molding the light that enters. And basically, you can say what's interesting is that not only does this idea have a performative impact on the energy consumption, it also has an aesthetic impact that the building actually ends up looking different because it performs differently. So we've been building the building over the last couple of years, and like a month ago, it was sort of almost complete, at least on the outside. But like basically, and depending on where you see the building from some angles, it's really all glass, and from other angles, it feels almost like an entirely sort of an enameled exterior. So we felt that there was something interesting here, and around this time we met Chairman Chu and TLDC, and he invited us to go to Hualien and look at a site down there. And Hualien is obviously a very, very beautiful natural landscape. You have the proximity of the very dramatic mountains and sort of where the rice fields and the mountains meets the water. And within this, we were charged with proposing a new kind of way to live, with all of the sort of amenities and the social benefits of living together, but enjoying the beautiful landscape. Also, Hualien also is a sort of a very warm, humid subtropical climate. So we came up with this idea of trying to apply some of the same thinking, but in a completely different way. So we imagined that the buildings could consist of these sloping roofs primarily oriented east and west. So basically where the sun, because we are so close to equator, the sun really goes almost vertical on the sky. So the east and the west have a lot of direct incoming sun, whereas the north and the south have almost no solar impact. We of course still preserve the views towards the north and the south. And the result becomes almost like this sort of stylized mountainscape. It almost looks like an architectural interpretation of this sort of classic Chinese landscape painting, which is like these sort of layers of contours. You have abundant views overlooking the open landscape. Between these sort of mountainous buildings, we create social spaces, almost like a man-made valley, where people can picnic, hang out, exercise. And the result is also that because of the greenery on these ribbons of roof, we actually calculated, again in collaboration with Arab, that because of the self-shading and because of the humidity of the greenery, compared to having a stone or concrete or metal roof, the temperature on the balconies adjacent to the roofs would be typically 4 degrees Celsius lower because of the evaporative cooling that happens around the landscaping. So it doesn't only make the buildings look more beautiful, and it doesn't only provide shading, it also actually creates a microclimate that is more enjoyable for the people living in Hualien. So here you see some different examples of like sort of almost like traditional Taiwanese landscape elements, but integrated and interpreted in a sort of contemporary way. And of course, sort of at night, you end up getting this sort of magical atmosphere where not only does the landscape light up, but also the light from inside people's homes. And as a result of these sort of gently undulating ribbons, we also end up getting some really interesting and very sort of characteristic homes. Like one of the shortcomings of modern living is that quite often the sort of boxy, squarish character of a modern apartment makes it less charming than a more traditional home. And the apartments here, you actually have a lot of the charm and a lot of the character that is sometimes hard to find in contemporary living. Also, all of the homes have direct access to their own dedicated outdoor space. We developed the interiors under the headline of creating this sort of Taiwanese Scandinavian hybrid. So organic materials, light colors, and a constant appreciation of the outdoor landscape. One of the interesting things is also that that when you live here, not only do you have a beautiful view to the existing landscape, but you also have beautiful views to the neighbor buildings that almost seem to be part of the landscape. We've created a prototype, which is the sort of exhibition center and will be the sales pavilion for the project, where we tested the different materials. And again, this idea of trying to harness like this sort of mixture of traditional Taiwanese and Danish elements in a combination that creates this sort of new form of living. So another sort of attempt, and I think this is also typical, that because by now we do operate in several different cultures, whenever we build in a new place, we also try to make sure that whatever we do somehow is informed by the character and the sort of heritage of that particular site. We're developing a concept with TLDC in Sinpu on the top of a hill to create this Tai Chi pavilion. On the top of the hill, you have an amazing view, and you also have like amazing visibility. So we imagined that we could make this like very small Tai Chi pavilion with some cultural programs, some spaces for Tai Chi both inside and outside, but that could actually have a sort of a characteristic presence in the landscape. It's on the top of the hill, and we imagined that the pavilion could really be almost like an extension of the landscape, almost as a sort of origami or paper cut to lift the site as this sort of series of undulating levels. Abundant terraces that also provide shading for the spaces so we can really enjoy big open views. Completely rational in plan. The cultural space, assembly spaces, and a sort of a possibility of doing Tai Chi on the roof itself. These sort of undulating planes gently come down and kiss the ground, so you can enter into the pavilion. In one direction, sort of 4 parallel levels, and in the other direction, actually a gently meandering path that takes you potentially all the way to the roof. And of course, like when you look at it from the outside, even though it is like rather different in the way it's organized, it starts. But of course, from the inside, you have an amazing view of the surrounding horizon from the different spaces, but also as you sort of continue to the outside, and also when you see it from the outside, it starts almost resembling elements from more sort of traditional Chinese, Taiwanese architecture, but in a sort of completely contemporary reinterpretation. So maybe like a last example of how the environmental performance of a building can sort of create a design. We've designed a building in Copenhagen, which is in an urban area where everything is organized like city blocks. So it's a 200 by 100 meter city block, 60,000 square meters of program. It has mixed use, so it has like shops and offices, 12,000 square meters of offices. And the site is rather generic. It's a new development area, so it has no character. It has no existing history, or the landscape is flat. So we really had to create the sense of place ourselves. And we thought, what if we look at the unique requirements of the different programs? So shops and offices, they like to be close to the customers. They want to be close to the ground, so we put them on the lower levels. On top, we add a layer of homes. But since the typical floor plate of a residence is less deep than an office, suddenly we get extra space in front where we can make a path and little gardens, so we can make townhouses. Then we add a layer of apartments and another layer of townhouses on top, sort of penthouse townhouses. Then the master plan dictates a shortcut through the building, and then we start sort of optimizing the areas, because like shops and offices, they spend energy on cooling. So to the south, we reduce them to the ground. To the north, we create a 4-story office building. We push down the southwest corner to open up the courtyard for the views and the sunlight. And gradually it becomes this sort of distorted figure 8. It's really on the city limits of Copenhagen. And this basic idea, it doesn't only allow us to optimize the conditions for each of the programs, for instance, by leaving the commercial spaces below. In this case, it's a kindergarten opening to the street, and lifting up the townhouses. We can sort of lift the homes up in the sunlight and the views, but we can also expand the social space. You can see here the offices are down in the shadow. The residences are up in the sunlight. And in doing this, we actually sort of expand the social space of the city, where you can say in a typical neighborhood, the social encounter is restricted to happening on the ground level. That's where you can meet your neighbors. But here you can actually walk and bicycle all the way from the ground to the penthouse. Here you see how the offices are facing north. Then when the facade turns and it faces west, it becomes residences. In the middle of the 8, where it crosses itself, we've taken all of the shared amenities and stacked them in this sort of social tower that connects from the ground to a shared roof terrace. And basically, as you move around in the building, you see these situations. Like this is like almost like a typical small-scale neighborhood with a small garden in front, where mom and dad are like sitting outside, saying hello to the neighbors. These 2 girls are neighbors. One lives on the 7th floor, one lives on the 8th floor, but they can literally walk down and play with each other. So it's like this sort of typical small-scale community feeling, but in the middle of a big building on the 10th floor. So it's literally expanding the social space from the street all the way to the penthouse. So again, like this idea of hedonistic sustainability, that by thinking synergetically, trying to optimize the programs so they occupy their ideal location, we also end up creating a social composition that actually makes it a more enjoyable space to live in. And to document this, we were contacted by the French-Italian filmmakers Louise Lemoine and Ila Becca, and they suggested that they would move into the 8 house with their little daughter for 1 month, and then try to film the life in the building. And it turned into a film called The Infinite Happiness, because we call the building the Infinity Loop. And I'd like to show you the trailer for this film shortly. It's a pretty interesting film, because like often as architects, we when we have finalized our drawings and the building is open, that's the last time we have anything to do with this building. And watching this film, I have to say it's 90 minutes that are like extremely entertaining and very honest, and really shows a lot about the potential social impact of architecture. That brings me to the last sort of series of projects that I'd like to talk about that fall under what we like to call social infrastructure. And we really mean it literally as infrastructural projects that have positive social and environmental side effects. Because we all know that a piece of infrastructure like a bridge can have a negative impact on the environment. We were asked to look at a site in Vancouver, this is downtown Vancouver, where Granville Bridge touches downtown. It triforks and it has been slicing up this lot into some useless triangles, which means that even though it's the most valuable part of the city, it has remained undeveloped. And we were asked to see if we could try to turn that into a new neighborhood. So we started sort of mapping the constraints, the setbacks from the streets, the setbacks from the bridge. There's a 30-meter setback because the city wants to make sure that nobody lives and looks straight into the traffic on the bridge. Then there's a park where we're not allowed to cast any shadows. And finally, we're left with a tiny footprint of 600 square meters, almost too small to develop. But then we thought, if the 30-meter distance from the bridge has to do with the minimum distance, once we get 30 meters up in the air, we can grow the building back to 1,200 square meters, double the size of the floor plate. The result as you drive over the bridge is that it looks almost as if someone is pulling a curtain aside, sort of welcome to Vancouver. It's almost like a weed growing out in a crack in the pavement and blossoming as it gets light and air. It reminded us a little bit of the Flatiron in New York, which is a child of the intersection of the diagonal of Broadway and the street grid of Manhattan, creating this sort of iconic building that is this one moment where elevators and steel structure and real estate value made it feasible to develop the site. But you can say we're taking the Flatiron maybe one step further. Underneath the bridge, on the lower levels, we can't do residential, but we can create workspaces, restaurants, shops. And we're trying to turn the potentially negative impact of the bridge into a positive. We're working with a series of Vancouver artists, including Rodney Graham, to turn the underside of the bridge into what we've nicknamed the 16th Chapel of Street Art. But essentially an art gallery turned upside down, providing this sort of canopy for the life between the buildings. The project is currently under construction, and I think could really be a great example of how you can turn the negative impact of a piece of infrastructure into a positive. If the impact of a bridge could actually be turned into a positive and could be like almost like the framework for the cultural life of Vancouver. Maybe a cultural building could function as a bridge. We're designing a museum in Norway in a beautiful park, a beautiful sculpture park on both sides of this river. And we were allowed to place the museum where we thought it was best within the sculpture park. And we thought, like, why don't we turn the museum into a bridge so you can actually walk through the sculpture park, walk through the museum. So as you move through the park, you will arrive at the museum. You'll walk into a series of galleries that are skylit. The skylight sort of turns 90 degrees and becomes a panoramic window overlooking the river and the old mill. And then you continue your journey through the sculpture park. In a way, you can say that it's like a hybrid between a museum, a bridge, and a sculpture. From certain angles, you might not even suspect that it's a building. It might just be the biggest sculpture in the sculpture park. And as such becomes this sort of interesting hybrid between a cultural building and a piece of infrastructure. And finally, we all know that sometimes when a piece of infrastructure gets decommissioned, it can be reinvented as a cultural or a social space. We were invited to look at a competition for turning an old dry dock into a maritime museum right next to Hamlet's castle Kronborg. The castle is UNESCO World Heritage, so you can't do anything to disturb the view of the castle. The Danish Maritime Museum used to be inside the castle, but because of the UNESCO status, they had to kick it out, put it somewhere else. So they said, why don't you put it in this dry dock where we used to build ships. So there was a dilemma in the brief because of UNESCO. We weren't allowed to stick as much as a meter out of the ground to not touch or disturb the view of the castle. But of course the museum, they wanted some architectural masterpiece to attract visitors. So we came up with the idea of turning the dock inside out, using the museum to preserve the dock. The dock becomes a giant courtyard. All we had to do was design 3 bridges, one that stops the water from coming in, one that connects to the castle, and then one that gradually slopes down with an ADA accessible slope to take you into the museum. We couldn't even make an elevator building because it would block the view of the castle. So this is how you get in. Also because we actually left the dock as a big hole to stop cars from driving down. We had to put up a series of stone benches as a sort of a line of defense. And we actually put them up as these elements that you normally tie a ship to. And we put them up in Morse code. So if you can read Morse, there's a secret message. So here you see the construction. We could build the bridges in a shipyard in China and sail them in to the dock and lift them in basically exactly the same way that you build ships. Here you see the sort of gradually descending ramp that takes you into to the museum. You have a series of spaces. It's one continually descending route, so you have intimate spaces, you have vast spaces, almost like a cargo bay in a ship. The architecture is really the interplay between the lightness of the glass and the steel and the heaviness and the texture of the old concrete. The auditorium, where the seats continue under the stage and becomes an auditorium for the children. The restaurant, where you look through the different layers of bridges out into the courtyard. And not only has the space inside become a cultural venue in the city of Elsinore, but also the dock itself has amazing acoustics because of the hard walls and the open ceiling. So suddenly this former part of the shipping industry of Denmark has now become the social and cultural space of the city of Elsinore. And here you see like this perfect diagram where above the horizon, the historical heritage, below the horizon, this new contemporary museum. This is this sort of inverse Titanic moment. So educating ourselves about shipping industry, we got fascinated by containers. Containers are very strong and very sturdy, and they're very efficient. And after they've sailed a few times around the planet Earth, you can buy them for 2,000 euros in Amsterdam. You can get a high top 20-foot container, 45-foot container. So we came up with this idea that within maritime code, if you buy 9 containers, you have 300 square meters. If you stack them only in 2 levels, a maximum 7 meters, you can put them on a floating barge in the port as a houseboat. If you organize them in this sort of hexagon pattern, you can create a shaded courtyard in the middle, and it actually creates space for 12 student homes. We've built the first prototype in Copenhagen. There's a terrace, a shared terrace. There's a roof, a green roof, and then there's photovoltaics that provides all the power for the residents. Plus, it runs a heat pump, and the floating pontoon actually sucks heat out of the water. So all of the hot water for showering, for washing, and for heating comes for free from the port. So it's really truly hedonistic sustainability. You can shower warm as long as you want with a good conscience because the heat comes from the sea. We built it in a Polish shipyard. We dragged it across the Baltic Sea. into the port of Copenhagen. And basically for $700 a month, you can get a nice student house. It's probably going to be the coolest apartment you're ever going to get because you have direct views over the water. You can literally jump out of your window into the clean port of Copenhagen, and there's a ladder so you can get back in. And essentially, we're bringing a few of these to the port of Copenhagen. We're bringing 200 homes to Gothenburg in Sweden. And we're shortlisted for doing a development of student homes in Le Havre at the Seine in France. So basically this idea seemed so interesting that as part of the Hualien project, we're developing this, container hotel where we've organized a courtyard by lifting up the containers, so we get like a nice cooling breeze into the central courtyard. We get these nice shaded spaces for bars and restaurants. We're working with different ways to sort of regulate the microclimate of the courtyard, and also the roof is like an accessible deck, and we imagine actually covering the courtyard with this net to create a gigantic hammock. Almost like a hammock at the scale of an urban space. So basically, as a way to sort of not only the long-term project of the Hualien Hills, but also a more immediate impact in the form of this container hotel. Back in Copenhagen, right next to this sort of student housing houseboat, we are building, I think, perhaps our strongest example of hedonistic sustainability and social infrastructure, which is probably going to be the landmark of Copenhagen in the next couple of years. But it's not a royal palace or a cultural palace. It is a power plant that turns household waste into electricity and district heating. Together with the citizens of Copenhagen, it's going to form an ecosystem that turns waste into a resource. When you look at a ton of household trash, it equals 1 2/3 of an oil barrel in terms of the energy value in it. So our trash is actually a very powerful resource. But it has to operate on an economy of scale. It has to be very big. And typically, power plants are very ugly boxes that cast shadows on the neighbors and block the views. This is going to be the tallest and biggest building in Copenhagen. And it's going to be right next to Copenhagen Marina, right where the locals go water skiing. It's going to replace the power plant you see here in the background. So we thought, like, how can we turn this into an asset for the locals? And speaking of water skiing and skiing, in Denmark we have snow, but we have absolutely no mountains. We are completely flat. But apparently we have mountains of trash. So typically we have to go 6 hours by car to the south of Sweden to get to alpine skiing. But because of the size of the power plant, we can actually create 2/3 of Isaberg, the Swedish ski slope, on the roof of this building. We know how big the machinery is, so we basically designed it with a continuous sloping roof, complete with a black, a blue, and a green ski slope. It has pine trees. You can hike. Miraculously, we won the competition with this idea. So suddenly we would have to figure it out. To give you a sense of scale, it's twice the length of an Olympic half pipe. And you might have noticed that in Sochi at the Olympics, Denmark won 0 medals. We hope to be able to change that because now we can practice skiing at at home. And of course, skiers can get a lift card, and they're going to have to pay for that. But it's also a public park. You can hike, you can picnic, you can enjoy the view of the otherwise horizontal skyline of Copenhagen. It's going to have the tallest climbing wall in the world, 100 meters. And basically, you can say this sort of diagram that I showed in the beginning of trying to consider our city's man-made ecosystems is actually coming to completion here, because not only do we harvest the local resources, we capture the rainwater, we use it in the facade, we filter daylight, we use natural airflow for ventilation, but together with the city of Copenhagen, it forms a man-made ecosystem, almost a metabolism. It's almost complete. These are some recent images of what it looks like on the skyline of Copenhagen. So here you have like the landmark of Copenhagen and the Little Mermaid. And basically the reason that we could win this competition based on this like rather crazy idea is because the most radical thing about this power plant is that it's going to be the cleanest waste to energy power plant in the world. The smoke that comes out of the chimney is completely non-toxic. It contains a small amount of CO2 and some steam. But basically, this amazing aspect of the power plant is completely invisible. Nobody would know. So, you would have to make like ad campaigns or pamphlets to make people understand this technology. But by turning the roof into a ski slope, you communicate instinctively that this is a completely different kind of power plant, that you actually have clean mountain air, if you like, on the roof of the building, and you start communicating that clean technology is not only good for the birds, it's also amazing for the citizens of Copenhagen, and suddenly they can get this like alpine park in the middle of the city. To take this one step further, we developed the chimney in such a way that it accumulates steam, and then at regular intervals it puffs a gigantic ring of steam. So you can say that rather than today a chimney is a symbol of all of the failures of a technology and of our society, in this case it's going to be a celebration, because every time we have reduced the emission of CO2 with 1 ton, we celebrate it by puffing a gigantic smoke ring. So you can imagine that children being born right now in Copenhagen, they will never know that it used to be that smoke coming out of the chimney was something bad. They're going to think that it's like this sort of celebratory thing that comes out of the local ski slope. As a last sort of implementation of this, because I mean, of course you can implement these ideas at many different scales. 7 years ago, I moved to New York because we got invited to build a building on the west side of Manhattan. It's basically sandwiched between the West Side Highway, a power plant, and a waste management facility. So we thought what they really need is an oasis. And you can say this is the courtyard building in Copenhagen where my dad grew up. You can say a typical Copenhagen courtyard is at the architectural scale what Central Park is at the urban scale, an oasis in the middle of the city. So we thought, what happens when you combine the density of an American skyscraper with the communal space of a Copenhagen courtyard? Or essentially, what could a court scraper look like? So we placed the courtyard, we lifted up in the northeast corner to 500 feet to give it the density of a skyscraper, but we keep the southwest corner low so we can get sunshine and views. And the result is this building we opened last year. This sort of striking new presence on the waterfront of Manhattan. Two-thirds of the homes have terraces sunken into the roof. The courtyard has the same proportions as Central Park, but it is 13,000 times smaller. It looks like a spire from the east. All of the amenities are wrapped around the courtyard itself. And the courtyard actually becomes like an oasis. It has sunlight, but it's also protected from the noise of the highway. And essentially you can say, like, by combining these two sort of unlikely typologies, the courtyard building and the skyscraper, we end up necessitating a radically new design that somehow is very much a major part of the landmarks of the city of New York. You can sort of, it really stands out even when you land in Newark, which I do quite often. There's this like beacon saying "Welcome home." Because of this project, as I told you, we opened our office in New York 7 years ago, and 2 years later, Hurricane Sandy came and wiped out all of Lower Manhattan. According to a cartoonist from the New Yorker, it gave rise to a new neighborhood in New York, Sao Paulo, south of Power. And basically what happened with Sandy is that because of rising temperatures, the Atlantic hurricane belt has expanded to the north and the south, which means that 5 states that didn't used to be hit frequently by tropical storms are suddenly being pounded with increased strength and frequency. And because of the funnel shape of the New York Bight, New York, the densest populated part of the East Coast, is now at risk, and 50% of the city is at risk. So we got invited to a competition to see if we could create the necessary flood protection for Lower Manhattan in a way that it wouldn't become a seawall that segregates the life of the city from the water around it. And we looked around and we got inspired by the High Line. The High Line is the second most popular park in New York right now, only superseded by Central Park, which is infinitely bigger. And basically the High Line is a piece of decommissioned infrastructure. It's former train tracks that have been given new social and environmental programs. So we thought, what if we could make the infrastructure for resiliency for Manhattan in a way that it comes with premeditated positive social and environmental side effects. In a way, we got sort of inspired by these two giants that have really shaped the city of New York. On one hand, you have Robert Moses, who's also called the power broker. He was a very important and powerful public servant who facilitated some of the biggest public projects, most of the highways, the public parks, the social housing, but often with a very top-down approach and often with a devastating impact on the local community. At some point, he tried to run what he called the Trans-Manhattan Highway through Greenwich Village, and he encountered resistance from Jane Jacobs, who was living in Greenwich Village, and in a sort of David-Goliath moment, she managed to defeat the plans and save the village. So we thought, what if this project that we've called the Dry Line, basically the High Line that's going to keep Manhattan dry, what if it could be conceived as a love child of Robert Moses and Jane Jacobs? Because to resist an incoming flood, you need 10 miles of contiguous waterfront protection, but to make it socially successful, it needs to happen rooted in a close dialogue with the local community. So we proposed this strategy where we reached out to representatives of all of the local communities. We took the hard engineering that was necessary, and together with them, we designed this kind of chameleon of a waterfront project that changes character depending on the input of the local community and the character of the waterfront. So I'd like to show you a small film we've made where you can see the people from the local community that we've been working with. You can hear their experience from Sandy. You can hear their concerns and their dreams for their future waterfront, and see what it's gonna look like.
That was actually why Sandy was so bad, is because of the phase of the moon, it was already a very large high tide, as well as the storm surge coming in with the wind and the tide lining up perfectly to give us 14-foot tides instead of 8-foot.
The most shocking part of Hurricane Sandy was the fact that it exceeded expectations.
I think the sheer magnitude of it caught a lot of people off guard.
When Hurricane Sandy came, we were not prepared at all. I mean, not even the slightest.
Yeah, it was like an alien invasion of water. And not the good kind of water.
So yeah, I mean, it came right in front where there was literally boats on 14th Street floating in front of our window.
We had a sub-basement level office a block from here, and it was totally covered in water for 2 days. So we lost everything, everything.
We're really concerned about another storm and the flooding that's possible, and we think that the next time it's going to come even further inland.
I'd like to see some type of flood protection in this area. That's going to happen. We're vulnerable, obviously, being this close to the water.
Something that just brings like more walks, different walks of life, you know, another escape from just the busyness and the hustle and bustle.
There's this great space that could really become community space, cultural space, and active uses.
Everyone enjoys space. And in New York and other congested cities, it's hard to come by.
Anything that makes the cities greener is just such a wonderful thing for not only the environment, but the people that live in the city too, to be able to be around that space.
The plans, the berming, the sense of how it can become into the natural landscape itself, how we want to program that is really the next challenge. We are the link, we're the tip in the sense of the big U. It's important that the entire waterfront of Lower Manhattan build in the plans that have been put forward, because we can not only fortify this great city of New York, but be a model for cities all over the world.
So, so basically this project, we are currently working on the first 7 miles of the dry line, essentially this like new resilient parkscape. And we're scheduled to break ground on phase 1 within the next year. And I think it's sort of a quite good way to end, because I mean, I think you can really see that from, let's say, from our first project, the Copenhagen Harbor Bath, to this project, the dry line in Manhattan, that if you look at these environmental and social challenges as design challenges, you can not only create a city that is more sustainable, but also more enjoyable, or a city like Manhattan that is more resilient, but also a waterfront that is more accessible and enjoyable for its citizens. So I think on that note, I'd leave it over for some questions with the room.
我们今天非常感谢 Bjarke。那我们现在开放现场的朋友问问题，不知道有没有各位有问题吗？如果没有，我就要先问第一个问题喽。 So while we are waiting for the question to come up, maybe I will ask my question personally. So I saw this trailer of Big Time, starting from very unusual, you're going through a CT scan. So I'm expecting something, that's probably related to architecture thinking because it's a documentary. Would you give us some insight about it?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. What you're referring to is the trailer for this film that's called Big Time, that is opening in Danish cinemas the 3rd of May. I don't know if it's going to come to Taipei, but and essentially I think it's the film director Kasper Astrup Skrøder who's been he actually directed a film called My Playground, where we got to know him and where he looks at parkour athletes and how they use the city, and he ended up using a lot of our buildings, and we had a lot of conversations about what parkour means in terms of expanding your notion of what you can do in a city. And then he realized that he was quite interested in architecture, and he was quite interested in our work. So 7 years ago, he started filming us.
Wow.
So he's been following us for 7 years. So he got 75 hours of film. So I think he could have made any story with the material he had. But he was quite interested in trying to create a film that, of course, revolves around architecture, but that doesn't feel like documentary. That actually feels like watching a film. So you don't have interviews, you don't have talking heads. You really follow this character who is myself.
Yeah, in the beginning it's almost like a drama. I was like, Bjarke, are you okay?
Yeah, but I think, and I think it's because I think architecture is one of the most exciting things in the world, but I think architects have sometimes been not super good at getting the rest of the world to think so. So I was quite open to the idea to use traditional dramatic elements as a way of luring people into the cinema, and when they're there, to slip a little bit of medicine into the pudding, so they actually end up also understanding how and why our buildings end up looking the way they do, and what is the potential that we might not be exploiting yet.
Okay, thank you. Well, really looking forward to. I hope I will see that in Taiwan.
For sure. It's coming to Australia.
Oh. 那边有一位要白衬衫的先生。
Thank you. I'm trying to ask 2 questions. First thing is that I see a lot of your work in turning trash places into magic with your innovative thinking. But when I see the work in Hualien, we all know that Hualien has a beautiful places. It's not an urban trash environment. So I was wondering, when you bring in concrete mountains besides those lovely mountains, is there any dialogue that you try to build? Because sometimes in Chinese paintings, we sit in great mountains with humbleness. So I wonder if these are some of the dialogues you have also in mind. Second thing is that in our boring urban boxes, as you have said, you bring in very dynamic and innovative ideas. To me, many of the either big or small, it looks like a great playground for those boring living dwellers. But in your project, do you ever come to a situation that when you have all the dynamics around you and you bring in peaceness and quietness to the environment? Any idea like that in your mind? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you take the project that we just finished in New York, the neighborhood is called Hell's Kitchen. It is literally surrounded by a highway, a power plant, and a sanitation garage. And I think our real contribution is that we've actually provided this sanctuary in the middle of the bustling city. So I think what we try to do is provide as much quality as we can. And of course, sometimes that quality comes in the form of a more contemplative space. And sometimes it comes in the form of a more lively space. It really depends on what it would be relevant to provide. And then I would say, like, regarding Hualien, I mean, obviously the site is not in the mountains. It is really on the flat fields where Hualien reaches the sea. And I think what we've tried to do is unlike what you often see, especially in Asia, is that you have, when an area gets developed, you have this sort of landing of a handful of towers, and you can say, like, the existing character completely gets overshadowed by the landing of these towers. And I think in this case, by attempting to sort of manipulate the landscape, we actually have no towers, but we have this sort of a man-made interpretation of an undulating landscape. I mean, of course, they're not mountains. They're not, you know, by Asian standards, they're not even like tall buildings. But they do somehow create, you can say almost at the urban scale, what a typical Chinese or Japanese garden is, a piece of man-made nature that does not pretend to be nature, but is man's reinterpretation of nature. And I think in this case, we're just doing it at a scale that is perhaps bigger than your typical Chinese garden or sort of man-made nature. So in that sense, I really do think that there is a quite close dialogue between the character that is Hualien and this new neighborhood.
接下来我们请那个环保署长有那个想要问一个问题。
Yeah, thank you for your great speech. 谢谢。I'm the minister of in charge of the EPA, Environmental Protection Administration here. So I was quite amazed by the creativity that you develop, the way that you communicate with your citizen when you build that furnace. You know, we have 24. We really have 26 furnaces around the island, but 2 of them, because of the protest from the neighboring citizens, so it cannot be open, functioning well. But I was used to run for the mayor of Taipei City, and I was quite uncomfortable about the walls to protect the flood. And because the top, such a high wall prevent the interaction between the people, the citizen, and the river. So I would like to give this challenge to Chairman Chiu as a great developer, land developer. 哪一天，如果你能够邀请这个我们的 Ingels 先生啊 ，Ingels 先生，把这个淡水河畔的这个墙打掉，把这个基隆河的这个墙打掉。我在竞选市长的时候，曾经想说要把它打掉，然后就是用像刚刚那个土墙，就把它变成土墙，就是高。然后这样像香港其他地方小的地方城市呢，就把那个柱子 就像现在他们社子岛就是这样开发，柱子就盖在那个土墙上面，那1楼就不要住人，2楼不要住人，就是可以防止那个流水嘛。但是他们告诉我说，好像是都市计划的一些法令没办法克服。我不相信哈。那我们现在说不定在座有很多人要竞选台北市长的，既然有这个例子可以挑战，所以我们也希望maybe in the future that is a job assignment for Mr. Chiu, but for myself, maybe someday I would invite you to visit Taiwan to take a look of our furnace. You know, we are introducing this circular economy now. We transform all this garbage, as you say, into the heat, particularly into electricity. That supply 3,200,000 household. Because all those stress. Even though there was one article reported in last May 17, Wall Street Journal, say that Taiwan is a genius state of the recycling, garbage disposal and recycling. But even so, we are not content about ourselves. So someday, hope you can spend more time here. I would like to invite you to take a look at how to transform those furnace into toys or interesting buildings. Thank you. Once again, thank you.
I think our time is running up, so we would like to thank you for the fantastic lecture. And then 我们今天因为时间的关系，所以就到此为止。那再次我们用热烈的掌声感谢 Bjarke。